All right, Valero Open this week, or as we like to call it, the tournament right before the Masters. This is a interesting event because, well, Jordan Spieth, by the way, your defending champion, he was 18 under last year. That's a 12-1 pre-flop shot. Before that, though, a bunch of dogs. Corey Connors back in 2019, 200-1. Andrew Landry, who could forget that year? 200-1 in 2018 to win it all. But, Matt, how do you feel about handicapping this tournament as it is the week before the Masters? And do you question, guys there to work on stuff? Or
Look, you can just look at that winner board, right? I mean, it's a bunch of long to middle shot guys that are winning this thing outside of Spieth last year. I mean, it's just the way that this tournament has been. And this is kind of an interesting course, Kelley. I'm sure, as you were doing your research, it was fairly interesting to me because there's like some hole. It's not one of those where it's like, oh, it's consistently this or that. Like there's some holes where the fairways are super narrow, and then there's some where there's very easy to hit, which makes for this weird. Does it really matter if you're accurate or not? Like the rough, apparently, if you look historically, is not very penal at all. It's actually one of the least penal on the entire PGA Tour. So it's kind of like, okay, even if you're unless you're like really spraying it, because there is some like just that natural brush and crap that you see sometimes in these Texas like courses or whatever. But I wasn't worried about accuracy this week.
So me either. I don't know if you caught the Justin Ray stat he tweeted out yesterday, was that green and regulation percentage was higher from balls out of the fairway than in the fairway at this tournament. Yeah. So I'm like, you're very right. That's something I didn't look at all. I mean, it's a longer course. I think length is going to help here. I did look for a driving distance and off the tee were major factors for me this week.
And there's only 64 bunkers, but the ones that are out there are super deep. So I did look at sand saves a little bit with my stuff to try and get that, if they do end up in these kind of bad bunkers, who are guys that are going to be able to get out. I didn't weight it very heavily or anything like that. Water's only on 3 holes, so we're not really worrying about that. And I mean, this really just kind of comes down to the wind factor here. If we see, if we don't see very much wind, we're going to see probably what we saw from Spieth last year in that 17, 18, 19, 20-ish range. And if this gets super windy in Texas, then things could go sideways. And Kelley, I'll be honest with you. I typically will do that whole deal where I put a wind guy in my portfolio because I'm like, okay, if this does get nasty, then I want to at least have a wind guy. I know it's still early. Projections don't have anything getting over 15 miles an hour at any point during the course of the tournament. Again, this is still just forecasts of what it's going to be. What it's going to be. So I just didn't bother with it.
Yeah, I just saw something from Kevin Roth like an hour ago. Actually, he put out a little bit on this. Forecasting the weekend. The only time that looks like it might be sort of troublesome is late on Friday. Mm-hmm. So if you are trying to play make missed cuts, anything like that, the early wave on Thursday, late wave on Friday, maybe you want to avoid where it looks like the winds are going to be the worst on late Friday. But otherwise, you're right. It looks like it's going to be relatively calm, so I didn't factor it in really at all either.
So I kind of made a wonky model this week because I wanted to have kind of a wonky card on purpose to see, because again, like outside of Spieth, this thing is like middle of the pack guys to long shots that have won this thing. So I did approach, but almost equally in the model, I did par 5 scoring because if you look at this course, the way that it breaks down, the par 5s, so hole 2 is a par 5, it surrenders birdies 30% of the time. And so I want the dudes that are going to be birdieing that hole 30% of the time. Then you go on the next par 5, it gives it up 21% of the time. If you go to hole 14, it has a 42% birdie rate, right? So I don't want to be on the bad half of the dudes that don't birdie this hole, that half the field is going to be birdieing. And then you go down to 18, which is the final par 5 on the course, and it surrenders 25% of the time. So I put par 5 scoring really, really high this week in mind. I just did good drives and not anything further than that because again, I don't think that it's all that penal to end up in the rough. Mm-hmm. So, hey, as long as you're not too far off and you can still hit the greens. I did birdie or better gained. I doubled up here as well with opportunities.
Me too. I did the same thing. That's where I weighed par fives heavy, but not as heavy as you because I think I weighed those 2 putting stats a little bit heavier than I usually do because of what you just broke down. Still on the par fives, you want the guys to be putting them in close and then converting from there.
I did scrambling because it has been pretty dry there. And so this could be, it doesn't look like there's going to be any rain. So if there is no rain, then this could end up being these greens could end up being pretty hard and pretty tough to stick on. So I did scrambling, and then like I said, I just did a small little 5% sand saves, and that's the model for me this week.
Yeah, it was pretty much very similar to mine. I was heavy, so I was heavier on between distance and off the tee. I was heavier on than I am on approach, which is pretty rare for us, like you said. And then my strokes gained par 5 is pretty close to what I weighed out strokes gained approach. Put a little bit of greens and regulations gained just because this is one of the tougher courses on tour to find the greens with that second shot. And then it was really just opportunities gain, birdie or better gain. Before we get to our bets, Matt, just kind of talking about some of these guys at the top of the board and probably a little bit why we're avoiding them. I think we should hit on Rory, Jordan Spieth, don't get me wrong, absolutely could come out here and win this thing. I just can't. We talked about this a little bit during the week of how much are these guys really prepping for the Masters, working on a little bit different things, and also just these numbers. You can't bet them on the outrights, I don't think. Hideki at 14-1, working off this neck injury thing like that. I don't think that's really bettable. And then you're talking about guys like Corey Connors. Okay, he was great in the match play last week, but you feel great. He's been great on in this tournament in the past. So he's won here. But 18-1, I'm not really prepared to fire there. So for me, it was really looking at, and I do have a bet on Chris Kirk, but it started for me at Chris Kirk and then worked my way down as far as the odds board goes.
Yeah, and I didn't even end up playing an outright on Kirk. I just played a top 20 on him. His win equity is not very high.
It's tough, yeah.
So I ended up playing a placement market bet on him. But it's not a huge card for me this week. I don't know if we have a graphic or not of mine, but we don't have time anyway. We'll get it on the other side real quick before we do our one and done in the draft or whatever. But one thing I will say about this, again, there are some guys that are going to be playing this. I would say, we said last week I only had about a third of the money in. I only have about half the money in this one that I would typically bet on the tournament because, again, let's understand that you're going to get frustrated by somebody in this tournament. Someone's going to come out and someone's going to they'll play a couple rounds and then just call it a day.
I have less than last week.
Yeah.
More golf bets? You want to get your golf bets in before we do the one and done in the rookie draft?
Sure.
In the draft, I should say.
We've got a graphic here. Mm-hmm. So I got Luke List at 46-1 for this one. Again, it's too hard for me to ignore. He's number 1 in the model over 50 rounds. He's number 1 in the model over 36 rounds. He's number 1 in the model over 24 rounds, and he only falls out of the number 1 spot when I get to the last 12 rounds. It's just
same here.
There's just too much leading me towards him. So 46-1 on him. Adam Hadwin is in the top 5 in every one of my versions of this model, and at 55-1, also a rogue number that was available here in Vegas, where Hadwin is sitting in the mid-30s everywhere rest of country. So we get very, very small bonuses here sometimes. And
outrights in golf is the few. Yeah, one of the few
outrights
ones.
in golf is hit. So yeah, I got Hadwin at 55-1. What I will say to this, Kelley, is, and I would still say to someone, I like Hadwin that much, I would still bet him at 38 or whatever it is that's still out there. I understand they're not going to get the same number that I would, but he is still a guy that was top 5 across the board for me. And so when that happens like that, if I'm getting mid-30s on him, I would still feel comfortable putting a ticket in the account.
That's kind of how we usually do it when we're looking at our models and people are wondering about that. How do you choose bets based off the models that you're looking at or that you built and ran? Yeah, that's usually how we do it. It just the small differences in our models didn't have him anywhere up that far up there for me. So it was a pass for me. But
Patton Kizzire, 3rd in my 36 round, 3rd in my 24 round. If you look at Patton Kizzire, a guy that probably is a guy that you more maybe want to have just a first round leader bet on because he's good for low rounds in tournaments and stuff. So maybe I'll add that as well. But I mean, he is inside He's inside the top 13 in every category that I mentioned except for good drives, which he's still 40th, so he's still pretty high up there in this field in all of that. So, I mean, he does everything well except drive the ball, and this is a course that we just said we weren't really worried that much about how people drive the ball in this one. So, not worried about that. So, 58 to 1 on him, and then I'm just going to look. I'm getting on the train of like last year. I was getting on the Burns train before his odds went nuts and whatever. I'm getting on Thagala before his odds shrink into nothing as well. The guy's too good. I think this is a future top 10 player in the world, and it's 75 to 1 in a fairly weak field. I mean, it's strong-ish, but it's certainly not that strong. And so I'll take Thagala there at 75 to 1. Top 20s on Hadwin and Kirk, and then in matchups, fading Tony Finau. I don't care that he had a little birdie fest in the final matchup that he had in the head-to-head. I'm taking Woodland over him. I'm also taking Streelman over Finau, and then I have Corey Connors over Hideki Matsuyama. Hideki has made it pretty well known that he's been battling kind of this back injury thing, and I think he's just going out here to feel things out and make sure that he's good to go for the Masters, and it wouldn't surprise me if he withdrew after a round or, middle of a second round or something like that. If he feels like, okay, I'm good, I'm not going to mess with this anymore or something like that, it wouldn't surprise me. So anyway, I went ahead and took a head-to-head against him as well.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to my matchups or first-round leader bets because I am going to make a couple of those as well for this tournament. Wanted to see kind of how the wind was going to look like here before the tournament went off and look at it a little bit closer tonight. But I'll tell you, those matchups you had, I hadn't really looked into matchups available here in town yet, but I love that Connors one. I think that's a great one over Hideki. That's one I'll definitely be playing too. As far as what I've got this week, only 2 outrights on my card. Chris Kirk, Luke List, 40 to 1 on Kirk I found here in town. Luke List, 66 to 1 here in town. Like you said, Luke List was number 1 in every model that I ran besides the last 12 rounds, and he was 3rd in that one. Chris Kirk was top 5 in every model that I ran. Chris Kirk also 4th in strokes gained here in this tournament over the past 5 years. He's got a T6, a T8, a T13 in that time. So outrights on those 2 guys, a top 20 on Kirk, top 20 on List. And then a top 20 on Keegan Bradley, who, we talk about win equity. Obviously, Keegan Bradley's maybe the top guy we talk about with that. He's got every shot in the game besides that putter, and he was top 10 in every model that I ran. He's good for so many top 20s. He was a guy through 2 to 1 on a top 20 bet. And then some guys that popped in the model. I played Austin Smotherman last week in the DR. Just a top 40 bet on him, 2 to 1. Brendan Steele plus 140. He actually really ranked pretty high in my last 12 model. So rolling the dice a little bit on those guys, top 40, and then top South Korean Siwoo Kim. Little Siwoo action back with Siwoo. So, played him here in town, top South Korean minus 110. KH Lee, really the only guy I'm mildly worried about in that market. So that's my card for the week. I will add a couple matchups and a couple first-round leader bets tonight. Probably will be Kirk, List, Keegan will be my first-round leaders, and maybe a Corey Connors one as well.